and welcome to episode 15 of Poetry Worth Hearing, hosted by me, Kathleen McPhillamy, and with music by Alex Heen. This episode focuses on the long poem, although it's impossible to do justice to the multiplicity of forms grouped in that category. However, we start with a substantial reading from Michael Daniels' poem cycle, Ravens Are Odd, all in terza rima. Michael then talks about the genesis and development of the poem, as well as his thoughts on the long poem more generally. Following that is an extract from Suzannah Houston's long poem, The Princesses at La Mirada. Then Giles Goodland gives us a reading from his book-length poem, Of Discourse. This is followed by an interview with Linda Black, editor of the Long Poem magazine. Finally, there is an extract from a new long poem, Love in Old Age, by Jenny Lewis, which is about to appear in issue 29 of the Long Poem magazine. Michael Daniels' poem, Ravens Are Odd, stems from the story of the village on the East Yorkshire coast which appeared, flourished, and then disappeared in the course of the 13th century. Michael completed this poem while working for a master's degree at Oxford, where he was supervised by Jenny Lewis. His pamphlet is published by Jenny Lewis's imprint, The Poet's House. In this reading, you can hear a substantial part of the entire cycle.
Ravens are odd. What is it to be held in mind by someone else, to dwell as ghost or presence there? The drowned recline in chambered mud, yet still we host them in our heads, subdued and dim. It isn't us who needs them most. It wasn't us who once fell in and reached out for an outstretched arm with flailing arms that couldn't swim. In those days God made luck or harm. They never learnt and never fought to save themselves. They died becalmed in thrashing waves as they were taught. But now they reach out in our dreams or clamber into waking thoughts. They cut the lines, they plot and scheme to steal an empty vessel there. As if to raise their self-esteem, they make us feel their lost despair. They throw our own thoughts overboard, free-floating like a nagging care, then sinking where the nameless hoard the leaded weights that hold them down. Their bone-white bones, their just reward. But turning over, all we find, the flimsy fact of having lived. There is no other shape or sound to draw them here, yet we believe they seek a future, us, the past. It killed them once, but they survived to drift wide-eyed in billowed rest, and think in us, who is life for, then drop like treasure, still at last, to ask of us, who wants it more? Their minds and ours get interleaved, and who's in charge we're never sure. We think of them, and they're reprieved, or is there something more we rouse? They come to us, and they're received, as much alive as death allows. Two ravens scrawled across the sky, engraving thought and memory. One stooped and banked to clarify each drop of sound. One rose to see this newborn land, as if to spot its own hindsight. Contingencies so quickly missed will quickly knot and tangle here. The marram grass that seeds itself in tufted clots, to bind with sand and chance and dross, heaved up into a new high point, a shifting bank, embedding loss within itself. Each starting point entails an end. The ravens heard and circled, striking ancient noises to feed their fledgling words. A spit of land, a gravel tongue, a river mouth, a conjured world, an arched up whaleback beached upon itself. They pleased themselves and flew away, crowing to the far-flung air, high above the waves that grew to loud collapse, like voices thrown. The sea would not be spoken through, or paraphrased, or watered down. The dead know things we've never learned, how hard it is to stay alive. Before they died, their minds were turned to handing down a means to thrive when Providence had crossed a line and left no hope they might survive, a fail-safe verse of their design. When out of sight of solid ground, the sun or stars will be your signs to lead you back to where you're bound. But if clouds build or fog banks bloom, then don't look up, but always down to seek direction, then resume your journey home. They meant at sea, when shallow boats could not assume their safe return was guaranteed. With knotted cord and weighted cup for scooping what a seabed yields, they knew by checking what came up and by the depth just where they stood. East of Dogger, 9 fathoms drop, the fine white sand with shells, then crud, the ochre soils, deep pit, red mud. How can their stories be shored up? They crumble weak as glacial till. Biographies discarded, ruptured, half-remembered detail, still embodied with a trace of those who by some form of ghostly will persist, denying how we choose to represent their mortal acts. So they return to reimpose their agency upon the facts, to squat in bodies, spirit kind, put flesh on bone, and reenact their fatal lives. In this, they find, they haunt themselves, and learn to strive by proxy in our sleepless minds, as we turn over weightless lives. This version has him staring out to take account of where he stands. A feudal lord, a bonded fleet, the politics and shrill demands of everyone and everything that walked or crawled or steered to land. He blamed life for his suffering and took revenge where life is weak, and in a manner most offending those whose trust he ought to seek. He dragged 3 children from their home, then hauled a boat so it would leak. Their family begged and screamed and moaned and threw their own lives at his feet to plead their cause by God, by throne, by honour of his family seat. But life was his to make the worse. He was their breath, their bread, their meat. He shook 3 pennies from his purse and dropped one in each tender mouth. Their future his alone to curse. He cast them off and shoved them out. He dragged his gods down from the sky and rendered down their useless forms. He stripped them out, he bled them dry, he left their portions to the worms. He claimed their virtues, powers, awe, their lofted wrath in all its terms of petty whim and brutal core, until he half believed himself the arbiter of heaven's law, almighty heir to any wealth he cared to name. But like a curse, the fading light bled out beneath his waking mind, and ran its course as shadows fell, as dreams returned to empty dark, that common source where even keels get overturned. He grew afraid of what gods know. His night sweats ran, his conscience burned. His bedclothes swam, his nightmares flew. He drowned inside a trap God set to drag him through the undertow that sank a boat where children sat in huddled fear, as if to show God's thinking us. We dream of it. Our dreams are thought in embryo. Because of all the weather hurled, because of always being damp, because of an indentured world where power hid behind the stamp of bloodline, birthright, title, law, the people had to like or lump their little lot, since nothing more was due to them. Presumably they made things up, a corridor inside their minds, a passageway to somewhere else, which turned into a dead-end hope, or stowed away inside the luck of some they knew from stories told when lamps were lit, they wanted to believe were true. A fishing boat, the Silver Pit, got blown off course by winter gales. The net was down, it dragged about, ballooning like a wind-filled sail, as if an upturned afterlife had come about as this one failed. The pilot wavered with a knife. The crew cried out to hurry home. But nets are fish, and fish are life, so on they hauled, and hummed a hymn. But soon the weight was hard to bear, as stitch by stitch the full nets loomed in view. A writhing silver sphere, a panicked orb, a shoal of flesh. Released as if a purse was speared, this scattered treasure fought for breath, unfathomed now as they inhaled to slap and thud their way to death. Their thrashing cloaked the deck with scales, a mirrored skin of burnished leaf. The storm moved on, the sky exhaled and blew them home to their relief, with baskets full of wealth that shone. This story's true, or thin belief. Eternal faith is brief, then gone. The sea was at its work all spring. Its brawny flux shipped gravelled clay, till half the land was digging in, the other half was washed away, and each collapse unearthed the past in pebbled mud of charcoal grey, where open fires once pricked the mist, igniting what the ravens spied, a driftwood place that couldn't last. Its back was broken by the tide, waves queued up, and one by one the dark clouds massed. The wind took sides. A deluge came, the end began. A month or less, the record said, till nothing stood and all was gone. So many lives, so many dead. Existence cornered by events. High tide, low pressure, thunderheads. A northeast gale without relent rained icy pins as arrowheads, sent wind-blown howls in long lament. A reckoning, a wave of dread displaced itself, as if a place no longer there would do instead, as if a name absents the face of those who fled, or stared ahead, or fell for water's cold embrace to ghost across its watershed. The gardens they had tended went, the cabbage rows were heaved and sloughed, as if the aching care they spent to sow and plant was not enough, as if the tilled and tidied beds were cheap as salt and air. The rough seas came and went all spring. They fed tall waves that split the rutted track. A storm tide undercut a shed, which wavered briefly, then fell back. A flattened box that lingered on, an airless dream, a flat-packed bridge to somewhere else beyond. Its broken parts were weathered down until they dropped, and then were gone. The nurtured crops became unbound and staggered down in tangled clumps. Forget-me-nots put out of mind, the waves obliviating lumps of land shrugged off, the dug-up wands of rose disowned, as violets slumped in claggy mud, then gave up ground, cascaded to the beach below, and scattered petals all around, where apples, damsons, plums, and sloes had proved with broken sticks and canes. A fallen harvest never grows, but trades its promises like grain it ferries out to God knows where, to sink below and rise again, to start anew, then dig and dare to stake a seedling claim, to bind new growth as if to make repair, then put down roots it brought in kind. The land was pregnant with the past. The bodies came out one by one. The last went first, the first went last, until the cemetery was gone. The dead dispersed along the beach. They lay around to air their bones, and mingled as the tidal reach laid claim to them and swept them out, then scoured them with salt to breach the tattered bonds of flesh and doubt. Some settled in their new domain, but others drifted, bumped about, as if intention still remained to guide them on an aimless quest to seek redress, and unconstrained by being dead, wash off the past beneath the waves, release an echo of themselves, freed from endless rest. Then prodded by the ebb and flow of tides that mimic give and take, they stirred their empty skulls below and roused their sleeping dreams awake. Two ravens came like gods restored and soared above this aftermath of vaulted schemes. The sea ignored such mortal dreams, but saved its breath to asset strip the sinking town of shattered timber, nail and lath. Each morsel piece got swallowed down, each broken pot, each spoon, each cup, a fluency struck dumb, then drowned. The people's final prayer rose up, petitioning their lonely God. The ravens read their trembled lips to scavenge scraps of uttered word, then spat them back as raucous noise, disembowelling all they heard. Their minds fleshed out each failing voice as carrion of human thought. They understood and set a course to compass points they knew by heart would guide them up a thermal stair, to vanish like an afterthought where absence crowds the empty air.
After his reading, Michael talked about the genesis of the cycle, the process of writing it, and about the idea of a long poem more generally.
Well, I think I heard a reference to the historical place Ravensworld quite a long time ago, probably 10 or 15 years ago, probably in some documentary, and it kind of stuck with me. I didn't know anything about it, but I think the name is so weird. It was just probably that, really. And I think it was also as a lost village. It had a certain, mystery and romance, obviously, associated with that kind of idea of something thriving and lively disappearing completely. I suppose I'd always thought about the place as well as a bit of an allegory for human vanity, and so I suppose it was in the back of my mind, and then I started writing about some of the coast along the sort of East Yorkshire coast, which erodes very quickly, and that kind of idea of erasure and things being lost to time and persisting or surviving, but only in in very brief sort of fragments and detail appeal to me, really. It's interesting. I mean, I grew up at that place as well. And I think that the sea and that coast very formative So I began trying to write something about it probably about 5 years ago. No, sorry, it was longer than that, about 8 years ago. I think one of the things that kind of appealed but was also difficult was that there's very little known about the historical place. So there's very little to go on, really, if you want to try and make something out of something that's essentially very insubstantial apart from the name, really, and brief bits of history. There's an issue really of how to tackle the subject, I suppose, where to begin, or how to sort of pin anything to it that wasn't purely imaginative. So I started a little bit with the history that is known, which is that essentially it was a very lawless town, I think, which thrived on piracy as a sort of business model. When persuasion didn't work, it was sort of persuasion and then force. I think they tried with local ships coming along, and so there was a little bit of detail there. I became more interested in the lives of the people who weren't recorded, because obviously history only tends to record the sort of the great and the good, as it were. So I think I sort of became a bit obsessed with it as a kind of ghost story. I think it was just the freedom of being able to project lots of thoughts into this sort of subject somehow appealed to me.
I wondered two things. One was at what point you started on the MA, and how much that sort of structure helped you to, or forced you into shaping the project.
No, I did. I started on that in 2013, and this was a project at the end of that course, so around 2015. 14, 15. And yeah, I think it was instrumental, really, having that structure around me. I'm temperamentally prone to endless procrastination and displacements of activity, I think. So it was very useful having a deadline, essentially. That really helped me because it forced me to focus. And I think having Jenny Lewis, who taught me on the course and was involved in the publication of the poem, was really important, because she kind of believed in it, and I think her belief kept me going when I stopped believing it, really, or was fed up with it. So it was pretty sure I wouldn't have done it, to be honest, without the course structure in place. And I think it also helped with working with Jenny, because it went through several different versions in terms of the form I was writing in. It was in free verse, parts of it initially, and then there were sort of fragments that we were sort of almost collaging. And then I had a go at trying a little bit in the terza rima, which it's written in eventually. And again, it was something I probably would have tried and abandoned quite quickly because it was so demanding. But again, Jenny's encouragement was really helpful with that. And I suppose in terms of going back to what I was saying about the fact that I was searching for things to hang this sort of material on, one of the sort of happy coincidences maybe was the fact that the historical period of the town coincided with Dante's development of terza rima, so it seemed conceptually sort of a piece to try and use a contemporary form to the place, even though it's an archaic form to us now, I guess. I think the form does lend itself. I mean, it seemed very appropriate to the sea, so that had a sort of thematic fortuitousness about it. Maybe it has that narrative propulsion as well. So I think in terms of it as a long poem, I called it poem cycle just because I thought I might add to it later, and I wanted to call it something that wasn't finally complete. There were lots of sections that didn't get into the pamphlet I'd written, which I may resurrect later on. But I suppose I was interested particularly in the idea of long poem, what the long poem is in a contemporary sense, because most poetry is obviously short lyric poetry, and whilst it's clear that no one's interested in the idea of a national epic or anything in terms of a long form poem, I wanted to think about how it could, how the long form could work for a contemporary audience, and maybe find a subject where the idea of writing a long piece had some kind of contemporary relevance, perhaps. I've often wondered whether the focus on short lyric poems is that a sort of a lack of, whether there's this kind of a lack of confidence somehow in the idea that there could be an appropriate way of writing long form poetry now, which I was very, very keen that it should be clearly a contemporary poem. I mean, I think I said before probably to you, my horror was drifting into pastiche.
I can say with confidence that there is no element of pastiche in this successfully contemporary poem which resonates with our times. And now, an extract from Suzannah Houston's long poem, The Princesses at La Mirada, which was published in the 176th issue of Envoi. This was the 60th anniversary issue of a magazine which unfortunately is no longer with us. Suzannah's poem recounts the experiences of women in prisons and halfway houses in the United States.
The Princesses at La Mirada. No one knows when she was born, from which life-giver was torn. She came abruptly to her place, princess of shame, hope, and disgrace. We see the pictures that she drew, art on her wrists, so the judge knew what happened on the reservation. Now signing off the legislation that will keep her off the streets and embedded in halfway house sleep. Once upon a former time, shackled before the judge, whose skin tone hopefully suggests that he won't hold a grudge. Princess number 1, Melina, young, tall, and defiant, insists she held no contraband. Her grandfather, reliant upon her on the reservation, will be left alone. So she begs for some probation that releases her to home, but La Mirada passes through. Princess number 2, Miss Wendy, blew in from South Borders. Mexicana chica, not so good at taking orders. Precious little Catholic girl, 3 babies of her own. Can't comply with judge's standards, so no way she gets sent home. So La Mirada passes through. Princess number 3, strong Sal. Daddy was a preacher. He'd been around the prison wheel and finally had reached her with all the hope and truth of Christ. She brought us others great advice. Keep Jesus at the wheel and such. Then drugs slipped in and she was crushed. But La Mirada passes through. Princess number 4, my favorite, June, who stood her ground, was sorry for mistakes and guns that brought her family down into the vicious cycle of the system that so failed to turn out this Spanish princess, 'cause they recycled her through jail. Then La Mirada passes through. Princess number 5, the angel always had my back. Apache beauty, boldness, love for Christ she did not lack. Hard-working, kept her guard up as she held her head so high. She was released to reservation, left me her shoes that I might fly. La Mirada passed her by. Princess number 6, Blair Hopi. An amazing tribe. She never did belong with us, just caught up in some bribe. Survival of the fittest kept her sheltered in the ranks. She befriended even demons just to keep out evil pranks. And La Mirada passes through. Princess number 7, quiet Pueblo, never smiled. Her bunk was high and mighty, TV controls always nigh. But when she spoke, the sky opened, or she simply had to nod, and whoever was intruding regretted much where they had trod, as La Mirada passes through. Princess number 8, God-given knack for loving all, probably born at Christmas, as her name befits the call. Cutest little children waiting for mommy's release. But she went around in circles. Prison programs never cease. Even her own sweet mama could not always keep the peace. But La Mirada passes through. Princess number 9, dear Whitney, feisty, fearless face, had a smile that lit the room up, did her chores, knew her place. She went way too deep into all things and fell off to one side, but she got back on her horse and showed us how to ride. La Mirada held her dear. Princess number 10, Elena, older than the rest, landed wrong side of the pond in a domestic violence fest. Yet somehow in the sunshine of high desert she did flower. Took her offer for no contest. It was her finest hour. La Mirada passes through.
The next piece comes from Giles Goodland's exciting and ambitious new book of discourse, which is a very long poem indeed. It concerns itself with the function or grammar words in language. Here he deals with the conjunction if, and you may catch the reference to another very well-known poem. More information about this and the other poems can be found at poetryworthhearing.biz.
If you can keep your head set when those about you are losing it and shitting on you, if you can embarrass yourself publicly, making all men unfriend you, but retweet their criticisms too, if you can give a fuck and not be tired by shit, or being fucked about, don't deal in fucks, or being cancelled, just do what you are going to do, if you can bear to hear the truth you've tweeted shared by losers who don't get irony and don't point this out to them, if you can grow old and watch your pension value decline month by month and your pension age increase and not invest in crypto, if you can search to see if your ex-partner is online and not IM them, or if you can correctly implement subnets and have a filtering point on each, if you can count to 100 but not much over, since you don't have much time, if you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of browsing on work time, if you can work out how to screenshot what you're dreaming and post the images on Reddit or whatever and have your card details refused and start again at the beginning and fail to give a toss, if you can switch news channels and see that all of them are weighed by interests and be unsurprised if it's the petrodollar or geopolitics or colonialism which says to them, invade. If you can draw a layout cell without insetting a layout table and tell which of your trousers are machine washable, if you can wear night vision goggles and see night vision while being forced to work in slave conditions because your passport was impounded, if when you arrive in your new country, you see it as a startup op, if you can play the game to its logical conclusion, and even then get ripped off, the payoff may only be a remedy for your 3-year-old's night cough. If you can see that some are vulnerable, but everyone at some stage will be, if you can be not prematurely exploded before your startup ideas are meta-coded, if you can avoid being forced to live in a refugee camp, spend your last few notes on a border crossing and have your mobile confiscated, if your main worry is not about global warming, but how it will affect which stocks are best performing, if you can wear long lashes and extensions which last for up to 3 weeks, if you can try a lip plumper or collagen-filled lip colours and go natural with clove-filled lip enhancers in mauve and pink and make sure it appears on a clickable link, if you can ask a trend guru to come up with a blueprint for the quintessential restaurant, if you can wait an hour in a call queue and still know to which company you are speaking, if you can do this through a futures contract and pay initial and additional margins, if you can introduce a pathogen and go viral, if you can market a product that has no use, whose sole purpose is to confuse. If you can rank high enough on YouTube to be an influencer, and you don't influence people to buy useless tat, if you can decolonize your mind and remain aware of the historical layers that rind your skin, if you can see history from the perspective of the defeated and laugh at the shallow victories of rulers, but also then reflect that if you have the luxury of reflection, you too, in some way, have inherited this from some other group's defeat. If you can still read the poem that was voted the most popular in the UK, that seems at first sight chained to old ideas of manhood and empire, then you can look into the sense of man and son and discern the irony in the fate of Kay's son. Then you'll be a reader open to the poem's chasm, for no one can be such a man at all. If you can list a set of arbitrary or unfeasible targets and set the stakes as whether your male offspring qualifies as a son, if you can make these targets dependent upon a creaking sense of empire, then you may not have been a realistic father. If you can detect logical confusion between the earlier use of all men and the man that you, reader, is not yet, you need not feel excluded. But if reading it you can also sense that Kay's poem is a poem first of all, you'll see that the rhetoric only indirectly addresses the poem's inner theme. If you can entitle your poem If, it is in a condition that cannot be fulfilled, because to be a man and a son under imperialism, or perhaps always, was more than a burden, white man's or not. If you can see that the conditional is not existent, that there is an aching loss upon which the poem teeters. As with all poems, it says indirectly what its main point is, that there are only conditions, and trying to become something that you are not will fail. And what's more, if you can use Kay's poem to speculate on the childish and destructive dreams we all contain, if you can read the poem as the insubstantial wish of a child, if you can do these, and all I'm asking is for you to sit and read a poem, yours will be the earth and everything that we've left you of it, which is not much, and, which is more, you'll be alone, and remain so, my son, my soul.
Another extract from this poem appears in issue 28 of the Long Poem magazine. Linda Black, the editor of the Long Poem magazine, speaks now about the history and purpose of the magazine, as well as her ideas about the long poem.
It was founded by the poet Anna Robinson in 2008, and actually it grew out of a workshop which focused on long poems, which I wasn't in, which was run by the wonderful Mimi Calvati. Well, Anna invited me as one of the editors a few issues in, and I learnt a lot whilst doing it, you know, particularly editorial skills. And we publish 2 issues a year. It's like a bit like a cottage industry. There's myself and deputy editor Claire Crowther, who I have huge admiration for. Prior to that, it was myself and Lucy Hamilton. And Lucy has a poem coming out in the current issue. And, you know, I have to say we are always absolutely genuinely delighted with the magazine and really want to promote poets and get great pleasure out of the promotion of our poets. We do have a mission statement on our website, and it says, since its inception, we have striven to publish an equal number of women and men and to foster a sense of community and engagement across languages, cultures, and countries. We are keen to promote diversity of form and content. We're interested in both the traditional and the innovative, and aim to represent a diverse range of poets and poetic styles. We have published translations from more than 10 languages and hosted bilingual readings at our popular launches. Now, these launches were at the Barbican Library, and they were wonderful, well-attended things. And we obviously had to stop that at lockdown, and we are now planning the launch for the current issue is going to be on Saturday, the 17th of June, in the afternoon at the Barbican Library. So we're very much looking forward to that, and we've got at least 10 readers confirmed for that. So promoting it is obviously a big aspect of the magazine. And I'll just tell you a little anecdote of one of the launches, which always stuck in my mind. So at this launch, as we're talking about the diversity of different styles and genres and of poetry, one of the people attending came up to me and said, you wouldn't usually get Poet A and Poet B in the same room at a launch. So that gives an indication of the wide breadth that we look for and have achieved in the magazine. I think you were also asking about memorable things that we had published. So I've chosen one, which is Edwin Morgan's Gilgamesh, was published in issue 5. And Lucy Hamilton, the previous co-editor, she had known him for quite a long time, and she had connections in Glasgow. And she actually asked him if he had anything that we could publish. And when she asked, he told her that there was a long piece somewhere in his papers, and he couldn't recall where they were. And James McGonigal wrote the introduction to it, and he talks about that. And in fact, then the papers were found and published, and he'd written it years and years ago. So we were totally privileged to have published that. And we did hold a special reading of this at the Glasgow Centre for Contemporary Art as a tribute to Edwin Morgan. So we do feel very privileged that the number of people that we admire who we have published, but also anybody. We're not excluding anybody, and we're not looking for anybody. I can talk to you a bit about how the long poem, what it does and what we feel that it does, which is different to, they can do so much. And whereas when you get a short poem, you can have a sort of build up to a kind of epiphany at the end, but there's often a kind of curtailment. And there's nothing against short poems at all, but the long poem provides a space to develop, okay? So it can develop ideas in depth, and it can be quite liberating to the poet. And so it can allow for a change of mind, an exploration, a digression. So you've got the poets exploring their own mind, maybe on a topic, but being ambitious, keeping on writing and not kind of whittling it down. And I can give you an example of that, which is a poem by Stephen Watts, which was published early on in issue 5. And that can actually be read online, because on our website, previous issues, many of which have sold out actually, we put 2 poems from each issue online so that people can get a stronger idea. So we've got this online. And it's a poem that I remember being incredibly struck by. It is in his collected poems, which have just been published by Prototype. And it's entitled My Mother, Her Tongue. And it's a really expansive poem. And there's no neat ending. And, there's the delving. And in his introduction, Stephen writes, it weaves, sweeps, and waves of many different strands and threads. And it's that sort of resonance that I suppose we look for. We do our best to read all of every poem, but I do know if I've read the first few pages, I can get a strong sense of whether it's something I'm not interested in. So when we go through our process of choosing, and actually, in a sense, we're quite lucky because they are long poems. We have less submissions. We get probably about 300 or so submissions, but some of those have 2 poems because our specifications are at least 75 lines of poetry and up to 2 submissions and no simultaneous submissions. We're quite unique. On our website, we've got a quote from Mimi which says, LPM is invaluable in that it offers a unique home to poets who write at greater length, but more importantly, in that it publishes inspiring work of such high quality. What would we do without it? Our process is that we each make a long list, reread each other. So we do quite a lot of rereading. We do find that we have some poems that we've got on each list, and it's like, okay, we're taking those. And then we have discussion, rereading and discussion. And that is always very useful. And I do feel that Claire and I do tend to see eye to eye about things. No arguments. But what do we look for? We look for poems that engage us in some way in their use of language, the subject matter, the form. The form is very important. And we publish a huge variety of different forms and layouts. So we're looking for fluidity, some form of originality, but they can be very, very different. They can be lyric, they can be modernist. We don't have any, we don't want this kind of poem. We don't have a list of exclusions, apart from the fact that they have to be at least 75 lines. All takes on the long poem are welcome. We have a submissions criteria, which we would always want people to look at. We have 2 submissions a month, June and November, and we do specifically say we don't publish the same poets in consecutive issues, and poems must be unpublished, and recommend that people read the magazine. We do specify each poem must be at least 75 lines long, but no book-length poems. Sometimes we do get poems which are a little bit longer, and we actually do look through them and make a selection. We do take sequences, serial poems, and they are connected. The poems are not each about a different topic. There is an overarching subject matter of the poem. And what I feel about these is that they can have this narrative pull and an overarching topic and a single voice, but they can also have multiple voices, and they can be linked but seen from different perspectives or different angles or places or that kind of thing. They can have patterning, they can have refrains. And I can actually give you an example from the latest magazine where we published a sequence by John Greening. And he says in his introduction, and I'd like to mention something about the introductions to the poems, because that's also quite an important part of the magazine. So he says, and as unexciting as it sounds, reading a book will quite often spark a poem. In this case, I had bought a second-hand copy of a wonderful anthology of British watercolours from 1750 to 1880. And this is what he's written about. And each painting has a title of the painting. So, for example, the first one is in Greenwich Park, 1757, and it's by Jonathan Skelton. And then he goes on to another painting by Jonathan Skelton, A Study of Tivoli, 1758, and then a totally different painting and artist, and so it goes on. So that, to me, is a wonderful example of how the sequence can also be a long poem. We also publish a lot of translations, and one of the other things that we now do is we do online reviews where we commission people to write reviews, and those can be seen on our website. And the most recent one, which we feel very privileged to have promoted, is a review by Simon Collins, and it's of the Chinese poet Yang Lian's recent book, A Tower Built Downwards, which is translated by Brian Holton. And we published Yang Lian previously. We published some of this, and the poem is about an Ai Weiwei installation, and they are friends, and we were absolutely delighted to get a response from Yang Lian about how pleased he was about the review, and also we've put him in touch with Simon Collins. So that is one of the things we can be really pleased with, because it's so lovely to promote poets, and the poetry community is extremely diverse, and it's extremely important to us. And just to say that the second review he did was by a self-portrait as Othello by Jason Allen Payson, and he too thanked us and was really pleased. So there's many reviews you can look at online. We've got the online reviews, but also one of the things that we do in the magazine, we don't publish biographies. So what we do, we ask each poet for a 250-word introduction of their process in writing that particular poem. So in the last couple of years or so, we introduced a new online page called Poets and Their Processes, where we will invite poets who have been previously published by the magazine to actually do a more extended version of their process. And that too can be read online. And the most recent of the Poets and Their Processes longer essays is by Janet Sutherland. And we published something from the Messenger House. We've also published from her previous collections, one of which was Bone Monkey, which I really loved. But the Messenger's House is just out from Shearsman Books, and it's a hybrid book, and it contains the journals of her great-great-grandfather, and interspersed with some verse, and it's really worth reading. So you can read about it on Poets and Their Process. When I read poems, they can have all sorts of resonances with me, and I don't actually feel there needs to be a through line in everything. That's my personal thing. So, and actually pertaining to the different forms of poems and things that we publish, because there is a huge variety of form alongside the more traditional. The visual element I do the covers. I'm an artist. I studied fine art. We are quite meticulous about the layout and the presentation. And we do a lot of liaising. We do the proofreading. Because the layouts and things are often fairly complicated, it is extremely important. And we have got a poem by Lucy Hamilton in this issue, and in it she's got symbols at the end of each poem. So it's calligraphy. So she's got, the poem is actually about travelling with the I Ching. So, and also in the last issue, we published a poem by Julie Renakers, and you'll be able to see it in your copy. It's called Design Annual. And in it, she's got a prose poem about different Pantone colours. And what she sent us had the Pantone colours. So for the very first time, we've published something with colour inside the magazine, which we've never done before. And actually, it's interesting because I'm just looking at my proof copy here, and I've got a little note that I've written that says justified left and right, which is for the designer, because you spot these visual errors and well as the proofreading of the writing. We read specifically for purpose of review, but we need to, when we have reviews sent in, we need to, of course, check all the quotes and everything. So we spend a lot of time checking and proofreading. You mentioned Adnan Al-Sayegh and Jenny Lewis's essay that we published in issue 28. And interestingly, what I had done was ask them to do a Poets and Their Processes. And then when they sent it, it was this wonderful essay. So we said, oh, can we use it for the essay, please? Mm-hmm. And they said yes. And Adnan, we've published him many times. You know, he's an exiled Iraqi poet. We have no funding. We are entirely dependent on the subscriptions. And 1 year we did have an Arts Council funding, and that was mainly the promotion of poets from different cultures and exiled poets. And through that, we were able to pay someone to design our website. So that was great, yes. But to continue with applications didn't seem appropriate for us, because the criteria is quite strict, and we would then have had to, it was like taking the magazine to different audiences and community centres and things. And that's not what our magazine, we have an audience of academics, poets, students, and anybody who's interested in poetry, but it's quite specialised, isn't it? So that just didn't seem appropriate. So yes, we entirely depend upon subscriptions. Unfortunately, we cannot pay our poets. We do pay a small amount to reviewers. Obviously, we don't have any income. The postal charges have just gone up, but I'm not increasing the prices at the moment. So you can take out a UK subscription for £25, which gives you, including postage, which gives you 2 issues. And an individual issue with postage is £12.95. Well, I have to say we're very grateful to the Barbican Library, because they don't charge, and it's in the music library, and it's going to be Saturday, June the 17th at 1:30. It is a labour of love.
And finally, it is my very great pleasure to present Jenny Lewis reading an extract from her new long poem, Love in Old Age, which will appear in the forthcoming issue 29 of the Long Poem magazine. The accompaniment to the poem was created by the music producer Roland Prither.
I'm going to read you the first 53 lines of my 95-line poem, Love in Old Age. Old man, with all those young men in you, all the young men you have ever been, still beguiling with your strong carnivore's teeth and stray glances that slip to other eyes than mine. What can I say about love in old age? That it's a burden and a joy, tiring and tireless, restful and restless, the final chapter in a saga my body and I have never quite agreed on. My body as friend and enemy, my body as unreliable narrator, my body as male-gazed, my body as slave and enslaver, my body as trade and trader, my body as Scheherazade, my body as tall stories. And you, old Priam, with your 50 sons, thought fit to weep for only one, your Hector, and at the feet of crass Achilles too. What is it with old men in literature, the Bible, primogeniture, the patriarchy, making Eve sinful, and therefore life herself, earth herself, sinful? My body as hidden, forbidden, my body as spoiled fruit, my body as transgressive, my body as meows, my body as shame in my nest. About those stray glances, you with your sculptured mouth and Paul Newman eyes, your blue eyes, brown eyes, laughing eyes, reproachful eyes, you with your crew cut, with your luxuriant locks halfway down your back. Oh, Gilgamesh, what do you say about those stray glances? Is it the open road that's calling? Safe journey, Lachodrome. Is it the road rising to meet you, the whale road, the faint memory of Irishness, Welshness, Scottishness, other, of how when you sleep, your paw trembles with mongrel nature, of how the noble man binds his sorrow to his breast as he journeys into exile, dreaming of comely bodies. My body has come to me, my body as bright bride, my body as visio pictoralis, my body as unio mystica, my body as 7 wounds.
What a thrilling conclusion to an exciting episode. Remember, more information about the poets and poems can be found at poetryworthhearing.biz. I hope you've enjoyed listening.